Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Young Scholars webinar, Summer Reading Strategies for Comprehension Skills. And we are so excited to have you here with us today. And while we give a few more attendees a moment to connect, I'd love to introduce myself and share a few quick announcements before we officially get started. My name is Kyla Evans, and I'm the Marketing Optimization Coordinator here at Young Scholars and NSHSS. And it's such a pleasure to help kick things off today and welcome you. Now, turning to today's session, before we dive in, a few quick reminders. This webinar is being recorded, and everyone who registered will receive a link to the recording by email afterwards. So if you miss anything or want to revisit the session, you will have that opportunity. But that said, we do encourage you to stay with us live because this is your chance to ask questions directly to our host. And since this is a Zoom webinar, your cameras and microphones are off by default. But once again, you can participate at any time using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type in your questions throughout the event, and towards the end, we'll have that live Q&A session. And now, I'm thrilled to introduce your host for today's session, Kaitlyn Garrett. She is a strategic communicator and storyteller. She believes that behind every person is a mind eager to learn from the world around them and a story waiting to be shared. Kaitlyn graduated from the University of Richmond in May 2024, where she studied English, leadership studies, and art history. As a lifelong learner, she brought that curiosity in teaching both traditional and untraditional forms. As a literary editor and project manager, a high school tutor, an education-focused writer, an independent historian, and a second grade associate teacher. At its core, her career is about helping others communicate authentically and learn how to learn better about the world, ideas, companies, products, and everything in between. Without further ado, please help me in welcoming our host, Kaitlyn Garrett.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Kyla. I am so excited to be here today to talk about everyone's favorite topic, summer reading. So today, we are going to touch the basics and the not so basics about summer reading. And our kind of agenda for today is going to be a brief overview on the purpose of summer reading. Why do we do it? Why is it important that we really remind our kids to do it? And is it really that valuable? Selection advice for these books, and then some general tips for some of the issues you might see coming up with summer reading, and that'll be in part 3 and 4. So yes, let's dive right on into it. So the purpose of summer reading, at its core, summer reading is so valuable because it does improve reading skills and critical thinking skills, of course. In a time where students are not in the classroom and learning in that structured of an environment, there is, of course, a certain organization and routine that comes from reading that is so valuable for minds that have learned how to learn within organized structures. And a book does offer that from the first page to the last page. Also, summer reading is a really precious time to uncover a new relationship with reading. If your student school allows for this, it's often a time where they can choose books of their own for summer reading. And that gives them a certain level of independence, and it helps them to develop that relationship with what they actually like to read and choose to read. And then summer reading also helps prevent learning loss. And I always do say that working over the summer does help students work smarter and not harder. Even though that might sound like it's not the case, ultimately, when we are keeping our reading skills and comprehension skills up year round, it really is going to help take out any last minute jitters or setbacks going into the school year due to lack of preparation or just being out of rhythm. So doing this year round and acquainting ourselves with text is really helpful to always have that on the forefront of our minds and on the students' minds too. So, for assigned reading specifically, if your student has a book that they have to read or a book that they have to read from a list, which is very common, this is a great time to, yes, prepare well for the school year before the school year even starts. And also for assigned reading and for non assigned reading, it's a great time to set a strong first impression. As a second grade teacher, I cannot even tell you how many students came in to me at the ripe age of 7 and were so excited to share intuitively what they had read and learned over the summer. And that stays the same for setting a great relationship and authentic conversations with teachers, regardless of whether or not reading is required. Selection advice. So, first things first, it's totally okay if you haven't done this, but now is a great reminder to please check if there is a summer reading list at your child's school. It can unfortunately kind of get buried in all those end of the year emails, and there is no foul at all if this is something that you are just now thinking about a little bit deeper. But if you are going to be approving your child's chosen book and not one that was set up directly by the school, there are a couple of things that we should be considering. For instance, reading level, interest alignment, maturity level. That's going to be more of the content in the book, and then format preferences and genres. And then a great resource that we have linked at the very end of our presentation and highly send people to is Common Sense Media. They do a great job at recommending books and giving specific breakdowns for skill level and how mature and appropriate content is for different readers. And so then I bolded interest alignment because this is very, very important in setting up your students' relationship with reading. No pressure. So emphasizing their interests is a great, great way to show kids that reading is something that they can have a personal relationship with and actually enjoy. For instance, over the summer, this is a great time to maybe think about, okay, there is a new movie out, and maybe I could bring my student to this movie. And in order for us to learn a little bit more about what the content is, if it's like a historical movie or even like a movie about an animal, there's definitely a lot of room there to work on getting that context and encouraging kids to prepare to learn more about even just the pop culture around them. That's kind of a great way to convince them, but not convince them to do it. And then also sequels and prequels, especially to books that they've read in school, is so, so helpful. And then non-traditional materials. I do think that it's important to note that reading anything is still reading. I had a student that was in middle school, and they absolutely loved reading different instruction manuals for setting up, um, I think it was a certain kind of computer. And you know what? It was reading. We're going to take it and we're going to run with it because that's what they're passionate about. And then for more specific recommendations, we have an incredible blog that we will link that has some of our top book recommendations for this year, specifically for different grades, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And now, summer reading 101, some basic tips from start to finish. First, we do want to start early. And by starting early, of course, we want to start reading early, but we also want to start setting the expectations for what summer reading is going to look like this year, and then setting those reasonable goals and rewards. This can be anything from, yes, maybe taking your child out to see a movie or taking them out for a special dessert, having something that they are working towards and having a reward that celebrates when they do reach these accomplishments. And then making a timeline and calendar for the summer is also a great chance to give your students some sense of control. If your student is not excited about summer reading and they perhaps maybe do feel like it's something that was put on them, this is definitely a great time to kind of let them steer that ship with deciding what their timeline and calendar is going to look like with that reading amount for the summer. They can even say, okay, by July 8th, I'm going to have finished X book, or by July 23rd, I'm going to be halfway through my second book of this summer, and letting them kind of take the wheel on that. Another great tip for getting in the habit of summer reading is having a designated reading area, item, or time. So, specifically, having a little reading fort. Who doesn't love a fort? Adults still love forts. So, it's awesome to have that specific place where you go to read, and your mind will eventually be trained in knowing that when you sit down at that spot, you are there to read and to learn and comprehend that material. This can also go, of course, with comfy blankets, having a comfy reading blanket. We love that. And then also maybe having a special drink or a special dessert that a student can only really have when they're reading. And then also with designating a time, um, there are also families that I have seen, and I love this so much, where you have a designated after dinner reading time, where it is pretty much seen as a standard set time for your student or for even your whole family to sit down after dinner is served and the dishes are up and to all read together for a certain set of time. And then reading. Something that is so, so important is active reading, staying engaged with the text, because I know that we've all read material before and we've gotten to the end of that page and been like, what did I just read? So, to help prevent that, but not make it super, super analytical and over the top, is introducing a little bit of highlighting and annotating text, but maybe in a different, fun way. Oftentimes in middle school, students are learning how to maybe color code or track through symbolism, different recurring themes, introductions of characters, dates. Those are very common aspects that they're going to be annotating in their text. But an interesting idea to kind of make it a little bit different is maybe looking out for different keywords, or even just having them highlight how many times is there a comment made about someone's hair or about what the weather is like outside, and making it kind of a scavenger hunt. That is going to force them to really look closely at the text and be more engaged. And then also making reading communal. Reading is ultimately a lifestyle. These are habits that are being formed from the very, very beginning of your child's introduction to reading, and it is important, especially in the context of being with others that read and enjoy it. So, parents, I so, so encourage you to read and to read in front of your students. They should see that reading is a privilege and something that it's not a burden that they have to bear with for a certain amount of time. It's a privilege that they get to steward and engage with for the rest of their life if they choose. And then another great way to kind of make this a little bit competitive and summer themed with all of that fun is having a family reading challenge. Maybe seeing how long or how many books can or how many books can one member of the family read, and how can there be kind of a competition with that. Even having maybe a chart on the fridge, that's also a great way to make it an interactive challenge that people can look at and see. And then similarly, having a friend or family book club. For families, this could be a once a month sit down where you talk about your text. And it can even be everyone reading the same book that your student is reading. that is huge. And understanding for that student and that child that other people are interested in reading that material too. But even if you are all reading different texts, it's a great time to sit down and share. And then for a friend book club, this is an awesome opportunity to kind of combine a social play date with reading. It could be inviting a student's friends over or peers over and having a popsicle book party where you all sit down and talk about what did you like about the text? What did you dislike? What rubbed you the wrong way? What made you more curious? I think it's very important for us to all understand that ultimately the point of reading is for students to have a reaction. The goal here is not for a student to necessarily walk out of every book thinking, wow, I loved this. This was amazing. It's actually for them to be able to think about what they feel about the text and to consider the writing. It is great and very healthy and encouraging for any educator to see a child come in and explain why they didn't like a book. Even if it's my favorite book in the world, if I can tell that a student took the time to form an opinion and even cares so much about that to articulate it and maybe even get in a little competitive riffraff with another student who maybe loved it, that is healthy and is showing me that they comprehend and have personalized that material. And then accompanying visual media is a very, very helpful way to also remind students that oftentimes all of our favorite movies are based off of books. And this is often the same with performances and live shows. If that's something that you have near you that came from a book, that's a great, great opportunity to kind of loop it back to the fact that books are often the starting foundation for so much reading. And that's why we do some reading and try to enjoy it. Common situations and solutions. So I'm going to go through a couple of things that you might be hearing from your student as they navigate summer reading. But I hate this book. This might happen when a student is reading something that they really do not enjoy. And this happens to all of us. It's a very real problem. And it's not one that has to be necessarily from someone just not wanting to read or an act of laziness. It could just be their specifications and what they like with reading. And this is important. So if you can, let them pick something else. It's so important for us to show and model that books aren't the problem, but sometimes the book is. Sometimes it's not the right fit, and it's not the right book for this current time or for their current mood, and that is okay. This is boring. So, this will happen, of course, even if a book is enjoyable. There are always going to be some boring pages in there, or at least pages that seem boring. So, some ways to kind of spice this up and make it more interactive is bringing up that family competition, as I kind of said, making it a game with competing against each other. Who can read the most books this summer? Um, how long or how many pages can each member of the family read on the airplane flight to Florida? Easy ways to kind of have that competition and track it start to finish. And then acting it out skits and dramatic readings. This is so fun and an easy way to really engage with the material. And it is completely great to make it as if it were a play or a Shakespearean novel. You can assign different characters, different people in your family. You can have a narrator. You can have the different voices. You can act out the motions. This is a story at its core, and we should be engaging with it just as it is, as the story. I don't want to read. Of course, this happens to all of us. I am an editor and a project manager for books, and there are plenty of days where I do not feel like reading. Some solutions to this are having audiobooks and allowing for your student to use that, sometimes even with their book while they read, and kind of following along and listening to the text can be really helpful. Or just listening to the audiobook in general is also a great kind of compromise there. And then of course, kind of doing those read alouds, both with the dramatic kind of flares that I was speaking about a little bit earlier, and just by having maybe a parent um, read. That is great and very comforting still to so many of us to be read to. And so then days off, which I'm going to consider a PTO from reading. So when you have your child set up or hopefully brainstorm what they want their summer reading goals to look like, what a great idea to go ahead and give them a set amount of days where if they don't want to read, that is totally fine. They can cash that in, give you a little paperclip or a sticky note, and that can be one of their days off if you want them to be reading every day of the summer. And then this does happen. Wait, I forgot I had to read that. It is totally okay. This happens to all of us. And I promise you that there will be some healthy trauma if your child has a book that they were supposed to read and forgets to read. The procrastination and the intensity of getting all of that in is scary, and you will remember it for a long time. I know that I do. So it's so important to go ahead and pick that deadline ahead of the first day of school. So if you start school on August 10th, having kind of that deadline of, okay, let's try and have all of the summer reading books that we want to have done completed by August 1st. And then having that fun visual chart to track that progress is also very, very helpful in you and the student in making sure that they are consistently reading and keeping up with those goals. So some takeaways and action items that I think will be especially helpful here to hold on to and really put on the top of your priority list. So first, summer reading is important, even if it's not enjoyable to every student, because it flexes brain muscles throughout the summer. It gives them a very solid start to the school year, both in relationship building with their peers and with how they feel going into the school year. And it keeps up with their executive functioning skills. Are they separating that reading up into bite-sizable chunks? Are they setting aside time to get this done instead of procrastinating or really struggling to sit down and interact with the material? And then it's also important because it sets a precedent for your students' relationship with reading. And while, of course, this isn't the only thing that factors into if your child really does enjoy reading long term, it is important. This is a time where they can read in untraditional settings outside of like the classroom. And that really is what we want. We want ultimately for it to be clear that education and learning is not something that just stops or pauses when we walk outside of that classroom. So then, simple action items to get started. Even though there are lots of different things you could tackle, these are some simple ones that I think are great starting points. First, checking in with your student about their summer reading so far. This is a really kind way to make sure that they are reading without maybe assuming that they're not if you haven't seen them reading. So this is a great time for you to also kind of check that they are following along with any lists or required reading. And then going ahead and setting out your expectations, asking about their timeline. When do they want to be done with reading? How many pages do they want to read a day? How many minutes do they want to read a day? How do they want to break that up? And being flexible with them on that and compromising where it's possible. And then also explaining your reward systems, if any. I think that it's very, very important for parents, if possible, to try and reward the great reading behaviors other than negatively punishing the not so great reading behaviors. Of course, all students respond differently to discipline or to consequences, and that is all about your child and what works best for them. But I have found with students that typically having that reward for the excellent reading and the consistent reading really, I think brings that deeper long-term appreciation for reading and the positive impacts that come from that versus just remembering a punishment that will come if it's not done. And then also selecting just one way that you can encourage reading to come alive off the page and into your home. So we talked quite a bit about that throughout this presentation, but just some reminders that could be setting up a specific reading corner or a reading place, having a set family reading time or skits or a social summer book club. And a great example is please head to Amazon or the bookstore right now and just grab yourself a book that you want to read because there's nothing more important than for these kids to be seeing that we all truly do love to read and that it's not a burden or something that we do just because we have to. And then, yes, at the very top of this resource list is the Common Sense Media's summer reading list, which we highly recommend. And this is also the same platform I was speaking of early that will give great reviews and ratings and give parents kind of updates on any like deeper, serious thematic elements that might be coming up that you might want to have conversations with your kids about or that you think they might not be quite ready yet to read. And I do have to say that most of this presentation was inspired by one of our Young Scholars pieces. It is linked right there in the middle. And that is the inspiration for this whole webinar and is a great tool for your review. And that is, I think, also going to be pasted in our notes for you to click on easily as well. And there we have that great straightforward list of recommendations for specific books for 6th through 8th graders. Other key blogs that I have loved consulting and interacting with from us are key strategies for improving those reading skills and becoming a middle school skilled reader. And then another article that we have on how reading helps a how reading helps middle school students build critical thinking skills. But yes, and now I think that we are going to move on to any questions or comments that anyone has. And I will be more than happy to answer and help out with that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your insights, Kaitlyn.
Of course.
Let's look at our Q&A. So we have one. It says, "My child doesn't enjoy reading. How can I motivate them without making it feel like a chore?"
Yes, yes. I love this question because it's such a real problem, and luckily there are so many, I think, available solutions to this. Again, I do think that having a set reward or letting them choose the reward is like a great way to kind of go ahead and get out of the kind of like routine that we get into of okay, I have to do this summer reading because mom or dad told me I needed to. And then also letting them kind of pick when they want to read throughout the day. That can be really helpful. And coming up with maybe days off where they get a pass and letting them pick and choose there is a great way to give them that autonomy over their reading.
Absolutely. And then we have one other question, which is the last one. So, my child can read the words, but they kind of struggle to remember or explain what they read. How can they improve their overall comprehension?
Yes, this is such a good question for all of us. And I would say that with comprehension, it is totally okay to take things in bite-sized chunks, whether that is sentence by sentence at times with really difficult reading material, or paragraph by paragraph or page by page. Being able to stop and articulate what you think just happened in a smaller piece of text is really, really helpful with putting together typically the bigger moments of, wait, what just happened? When you kind of are following along and checking in with your brain continually, even at times when you might not think that you need to, it really kind of helps with stringing that all together.
Absolutely. And I
Yes.
have one last question from the Q&A. What types of children struggle the most with summer reading?
This is a great question. I think that children that struggle the most with summer reading are going to be the students that maybe don't have a great view of reading, or maybe they don't think that they're good at it. And that is something that we want to nip out immediately. And summer really is the time to do that, especially given that students have that control, hopefully, over what they are reading and the kinds of material that they're engaging with, and even just the level of the book. Fluency with reading is so important. It is totally okay if a student wants to reread a book or revisit a book that they might have even read bits and pieces of throughout their school year. Just making sure that they really do understand that everyone can read and that reading isn't something that goes away, but more importantly, it is a resource for so much joy and genuine contentment that will serve them for the rest of their life.
Absolutely.
Yes.
A reader, avid reader myself, and a person that enjoyed reading as a kid, I really am thankful for these insights that you have, especially now, because it's so important for our young people to be reading, especially during the summer. So thank you for everything that you had to say this evening. And thank you to all the parents that submitted their questions for Kaitlyn to answer. And just for being with us this evening. Big thanks to our Young Scholars members, to our community, to our students that joined with us this evening as well, and to our amazing host, Kaitlyn Garrett, for sharing your energy and insights. We hope you found today's session helpful and inspiring as you take steps towards a successful high school journey and a successful reading summer. And don't forget, this recording will be shared via email so that you can revisit any portion of today's webinar. But thank you guys so much for being here, and we will see you at the next one.
Thank you so much, y'all. Happy reading.